Ambassador, give a round of applause.
Good evening, my fellow African diaspora and friends of Africa. His Excellency, the Ambassador to Ethiopia, to the family members of the royal family. I see my sister here. We were together just a few days ago. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to join us to celebrate one of our heroes. 127 years ago, a giant was born. A giant after having lived in an Africa that was divided and chopped up into tiny little economies that clearly could not survive on their own. A giant who said 56 years ago, enough is enough, that Africa can no longer continue to be divided. A giant who took it upon himself to call on all his brothers and sisters who were leading the continent back in 1963 to come to Addis Ababa, just like they did when they met in Berlin, Germany. What was done to the continent in Berlin was evil, plain and simple. And the emperor said, we must reverse the Berlin Conference. So he called upon all his brothers to come to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Precisely, just like they met in Berlin to see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated, they met in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, at the invitation of none other than Emperor Haile Selassie to see to it. To see to it that the children of Africa can no longer be divided, and that the children of Africa must come together, and that Africa must speak with one voice. So in 1963, the children of Africa, the Pan-African leaders came together at the emperor's invitation. What a vision. To discuss how the children of Africa can undo the Berlin Conference. For those of you who are not familiar with the Berlin Conference, I urge you to look it up. The Africa that we have today and the problems that we are experiencing in Africa today, they all go back to the Berlin Conference. You see, during the Berlin Conference, they chopped up Africa into tiny little economies that clearly cannot survive on their own. I know I've heard some who say, but Ambassador, why do you talk about the Berlin Conference? It's a thing of the past. Well, allow me to bring it home. Allow me to bring it home. They set out to chop up our Africa into the tiny little countries that we are today. Prior to the Berlin Conference in 1884, we were humongous, powerful kingdoms with well-established educational and religious systems. We had it going in our Africa. That was too much for them. They couldn't take it. You see, a powerful, united Africa is an Africa that cannot be exploited. History tells us that one Englishman, after having traveled throughout the continent, finding economies and people that were so strong and powerful that they wondered how they, the colonizer, could defeat these incredible people. History tells us that they set out to put in place a system that would make the Africans believe everything African was bad and everything European, particularly French and British, was more desirable. It was all by design to destroy what was once an amazing continent, far more advanced than they, the Europeans. It is precisely because we were more advanced than they were that they stole as many artifacts as they have stolen from the continent. Simply put, we had what they did not have. Even to this day, what they stole from our continent, they are refusing to give our artifacts back. What kind of people are they? Shameful. There is no other way to explain it. Even after they have chopped off our heads to go and experiment on the skulls of black people, to this day, we are simply asking for the skulls of our ancestors, and some of them are still refusing to give them back to us. Seriously? Who does that? And they call themselves civilized. Civilized people do not do that. So it is, they chopped us up into all these many little countries that you see. They set in motion the rule of divide and conquer, made us believe that we were inferior and they were superior. That was 135 years ago. Moving forward, nothing has changed. Have you ever wondered why is it that Mozambique, which is an oil producer, Mozambican oil has to get out of Mozambique, out of Africa, only for Zimbabwe next door to buy the same oil at 20 to 30 times the cost? It's because it's easier to trade with the euro, with the pound, with the US dollar, than to switch to the Malawi kwacha. Thanks to the Berlin Conference. A friend of mine once showed me a map. There was a group of African women on one side of what looked like a road, selling their tomatoes and vegetables. And about this far, another group of women were doing the same. And he said to me, Ambassador, when you look at this picture, what do you see? I said, I see a road. He said, no, that is a border. When the women on this side of the street run out of tomatoes, the customers, while they can see the tomatoes across the street, what looks like a street, they cannot go there to buy the tomatoes. Why? They need a visa. Thanks to the Berlin Conference. Have you wondered why goods from Kenya to Central African Republic, two countries that are separated by one country, do you know how far those goods have to go from Kenya to get to Central African Republic? They have to go from Kenya all the way down to Cape Town, all the way back up to Cameroon, only to be ferried into Central African Republic. Why is that? Thanks to the Berlin Conference. My brother, who is the largest producer of towels in Egypt, he has to send his towels to Italy, only for his towels to be renamed Italian towels. So the brothers and sisters back in Africa can buy them back from Italy as Italian towels at 20 to 30 times the cost, thanks to the Berlin Conference. Have you ever wondered why intra-African trade is sitting at about 18%? Why can't we trade among each other? Because we got 44 different currencies, small currencies, that it is difficult for a brother in Malawi, a brother in Zambia, to buy towels from his brother in Egypt. But it's easier to buy the same towels out of Italy. Thanks to the Berlin Conference. So Emperor Haile Selassie, understanding that at the end of the day we may have attained political independence, we still need economic independence. Some of you may not know, as we were quote unquote receiving our independence from our colonizers between 1958 and 1961, I often talk about the most horrible thing that was done to the Africans by the French. The French made the African countries, 14 of them to be exact, sign what they call the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. Could they at least have found another name? You want your independence? You must sign this document that is called the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. That if you do not sign this document, there will be consequences. Well, guess what? Secretary of Guinea said, absolutely not. France, pack your bags and go on home. Mali did the same thing as well. So in their rage and infuriation, wondering why any black man has the audacity of not wanting to be affiliated to France. History tells us France went into those two countries, took everything that they thought they had brought to those two countries. To hear Mugabe put it, they even took the last teaspoon and the last chair. Proceeded to pour concrete into the sewage pipes, completely devastating the two economies. The then newly appointed President of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, in order to help these two economies, created the first ever known union of any African states, Ghana, Guinea, and Mali. What they did to Guinea and Mali sent a message to the rest of the African countries, the Francophone countries. There is no such thing as Francophone, but I'm going to use it for the purposes of communication. There's only Africans, no Francophone. So just so you know, the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization, allow me to highlight a couple of issues. They said, you Africans, you don't know how to manage your money. You are going to deposit 85% of your bank reserves with the French Central Bank under the control of the French Minister of Finance. And should you need some of your own money that you have deposited with France, you have to submit your own country's financial reports. And if approved, you can only access up to 20% of your money as a loan at commercial interest rate. That was between 1958 and 1961. Fast forward 2019, may the beat goes on. They are still paying. The African countries are still depositing funds into the French Central Bank. Today, France is receiving, getting out of Africa, over $500 billion from African countries, and they still have the audacity to turn around and call us poor. They have the audacity to talk about why are the African youth dying trying to cross the Mediterranean. What's wrong with you African leaders? Why can't you take care of our people? Why to France I say, just leave our $500 billion and we'll be all right. They also said, you Africans, we are going to be the only ones to print your money. We're going to call it the Central African CFA and the West African CFA. No one else can print your money except France. The language of instruction shall be French. All your minerals discovered and yet to be discovered, the French companies have the first right of refusal. Now, my brothers and sisters, if you were to be a president of an African country, and I often say, the first day in office, your chief of staff walks in and reads you the do's and don'ts as stipulated by the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. You have lost your economic power. You have no control of your natural resources. What power do you have? What can you possibly do in your country? 2019, as we speak, the carnage as stipulated by the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization continues in your Africa, in our Africa. Emperor Haile Selassie understood all this. He said, what is it that we black people have done to deserve this abuse? Have we not been wounded enough? Let's go back to colonization. That wasn't enough. Now, in the name of giving us independence when you really have not left, colonization, my brothers and sisters, remains alive and well in our Africa. Emperor Haile Selassie was very clear about that. He understood it. And that is why he called on the Pan-African leaders to come and say, let's put an end to this stupidity. Africa belongs to the Africans and her children at home and abroad. So during the creation of the Organization of African Unity, Kwame Nkrumah chimed in. He said, Africa for the Africans, at home and abroad, and African Union now. He also proclaimed that you were not African because you were born in Africa. You are African because Africa is born in you. You see, you have to understand that being an African is a spirit. I work with an amazing team of Americans who may not look like me at the State Department right here in Washington, D.C. I feel blessed that I have such a team working with me. All of them, the majority of them, have been to Africa. They understand Africa. As a matter of fact, I call them my African brothers and sisters because they truly have Africa born in them. So with that in mind, Imperial Haile Selassie sat down around the table, just like they did in Berlin, but this time with his African brothers, to strategize on how to undo this evil that befell our continent in the name of the Berlin Conference. How to undo this evil that befell our continent in the name of the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. Because they realized the only way to really get over this is for us to speak with one voice. But sadly, when they came to Addis Ababa, they were divided. We had the Casablanca group, who were Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. And then the rest were the nationalists, who were the Monrovia group. The Casablanca group said, African Union now. The nationalists says, well, let's go slow. And because they were the majority, they won. 55 years later, Africa is still going slow. The energy and vigor that our Pan-African leaders left for us, somehow for 55 years, we lost it. We are sleeping, my brothers and sisters. What is it going to take for us to wake up? All is not lost, however. Last year, March, our African leaders finally came together and said the insanity of yesteryear must come to an end. They agreed on what we are now calling the African Continental Free Trade Area, where Africa is going to be speaking with one voice. The heads of states, 54 of them, Nigeria being the last one to sign, said, amen. Africa must speak with one voice.